Welcome in a new video, and here I will show you everything about middle game and endgame principles as well. My opponent starts with c4, the English opening, and I decide to attack the center right away. No nonsense, going forward. Here I take back and I have a pawn in the center. Great, and my opponent also make sure to have a pawn in the center. These opening principles are pawn in the center, develop your pieces like I'm doing now, and also make sure to castle your king. Here I develop as well, and we have a very symmetrical setup with these pawns and these knights. Here the bishop to f4 would have been a great move for my opponent, entering the Slav exchange, and we would enter lines played many times before. But my opponent went for the move e3, which is not the best move, and the computer doesn't like this move as you simply block your bishop behind the pawns here. And the bishop only has a future on d2 sometime soon. Here I play the move a6, very common in these lines to prevent the bishop from going here, and bishop to e2. Just developing, I went bishop to f5. The computer doesn't like it as much, but the bishop is often behind this pawn chain, and I had the option here to get it out of the pawn chain. My opponent plays knight to h4 here, attacking the bishop, very logical approach, and I saw this and I expected this to happen as well, and I simply drop back. The downside of this move is that my opponent already made two moves with his knight, while he also could have castled or developed the bishop instead. Here, the move a3, a bit slow. I'm not threatening anything here yet. This is not really a move for me because of castling, and yeah, this is just a fine position for white. But my opponent didn't see bishop to d2 and went a3 instead. Here I played a move rook to c8. Maybe I should have developed first, but I like to get the rook on the semi-open file and get my rook active, although I know it's not a principle of the opening here. And here my opponent decides to trade off the bishop for the knight, and as a result I do get an open h file. So that's when I played bishop to f5. I did saw knight h4 of course, but then I thought, okay, you know, open h file is really nice. And here my opponent plays the move f3. The downside is probably you want to go to e4, but I want to prevent e4 for sure. But the downside is that black is already a bit weak here, and this square is already weak because of the pin, and maybe I can enter on the black squares here. So I play queen to c7, already trying to get advantage from this pawn. Here my opponent plays the move g3, which gets a question mark, and this doesn't work yet, right? So when you think about tactics, you always think about, can I give a check? Can I capture things? Can I attack things? So can I give a check? Yes. Even though it's a queen sack, you have to check it out. Takes, and this would work if the bishop would not be on this diagonal, right? Now the bishop gets in between and it doesn't work. But otherwise, I could have won the queen here. So that's very interesting, and then I would have won a pawn. But didn't happen. I went e6 and after bishop to d2. Already my opponent is developing, but these bishops are not too amazing, and yeah, this also looks a bit awkward here. And I play the move bishop to d6. Here my opponent goes king to f2, protecting these pawns. And here this move would have been very strong. Of course I was thinking about this move, but I saw a very direct line and I thought it was working out for me. Do you see the option? This pawn is pinned, but if we would take, then my opponent can simply take back, and this doesn't work for sure. I just simply gave up my bishop. But if I reverse the order again, we already checked this check, but can we think about another check? Yes, check, and this is also what I played. So my opponent takes back, and here I take with a check. The king has to go aside, and then I just simply take the rook and also threaten to bring in the queen. And maybe the knight will also come in, but my opponent has a very strong move in store here. Because my bishop and my queen are now connected. Can you break that connection? Yes, you can with the move f4. And now my bishop all of a sudden cannot escape here. And I cannot defend it either like this or that. So I simply have to give up my bishop here for the pawn, but I get another pawn in return. This pawn, because it's loose. And I was thinking, because this is the position I saw, of course, after I took with the rook on h2, I thought, okay, I have here 7 pawns against 3 and a bishop less. So 1 minor piece for 4 pawns, and that should be better for me. The downside is that my pawns are still a bit on the back side of the board, have to go a long way in order to cross the board and actually promote it. So let's see how I continued. Here my opponent gave a check, already posing me with some questions, and I simply have to retreat my knight, otherwise I lose my knight. And I already have to go back, which is not something I wanted to do, but I had to do. And here my opponent goes for the rook into the corner of the board, threatening a check here. And here I was doubting for a long time, should I go with my king here or here? Here it might be open for some checks at some point, and here I walk into the pin. Instead, I decided to play this pawn forward and pose my opponent questions. Where is the knight going to? The downside is that this square might become weak at some point, although it's protected now. But the bishop might land here as well. So I need to push my pawns in order to convert on my extra pawns. But on the other side, when I push them forward, it also creates weaknesses. So I have to be very careful here. And my opponent decides to give a check and trade off the rooks next, which might make a lot of sense. But having the rook here and having the threat on the board to ever give a check here, or even going here when the knight moves or is taken or whatever, might be even stronger. So that's why the computer gives a question mark. Computer takes the rook, and I am 4 points against a minor piece, but my pieces are still a bit weak, and my queen is also a bit defensive, not really active. So I need to find ways to really activate my pieces. And I thought maybe I can activate my queen through here, but the king at the same time also covers a lot of excess squares. So it's not that simple. The knight had to move, of course. And I thought that this might be the better approach, to go here and activate the knight here, but my opponent went back, but thought to maybe go here. And that's a middle game principle. Make sure to have your pieces in front of pawns. Here, knight to d5 gives a question mark, because I thought to attack weaknesses of my opponent, but my opponent has a very forcing move here, and that's bishop to f3. Basically going for the trade of pieces. And when that happens, then I get a doubled pawn in the center of the board. And then my pawns are not so strong anymore when they're doubled. You can simply put a knight in front of it, and that might be a good solution for my opponent. Queen c7, threatening to go here anyway, but my opponent decides to take and take back. So this is what we ended up with the double pawns in the center. Still I have an extra pawn, right? Compared to the minor piece, which is worth 3 points, and I have 4 pawns, so 1 point extra. But if you get your knight here, for example, then you might already have a very good position, and this bishop might already be better than my knight. So hard to convert, and white is slightly better here. And the queen drops back in order to attack 2 pieces. Well, simply have to defend it. I don't want my king any closer to the pawns, because then I have a lot of horrible setups like this. So don't pin your own pieces, and instead I play the queen here. Also threatening to give a check and maybe entering and maybe going for a forced draw when possible. Now the knight moves here, also preventing me to enter here, but also eyeing to go here at some point. I drop my king back. Normally you want your king to go forward, but with these pieces on the board, my king is quite vulnerable. Yeah, I need to do something, and my king is better over here. The queen goes there and offers a queen trade. Better would have been to keep the queens on the board, because that's how you normally, I would say, if you're up in material, convert, but you're not really up in material. You have a piece for 4 pawns, and the less material on the board, the more equal, or maybe even the better it gets for me. Because with less pieces, it's harder to control all these pawns on the different sides of the board. So my opponent offers the queen trade. I can't allow my opponent to enter here, so going back, for example, would not really be smart, and I simply go for the queen trade. Still, this is a very good endgame for my opponent, and I decide to bring in my king, right? It's important that I bring in my pieces, and my king is also a piece. It can attack as well, so make sure to bring it in as an attacker and help to guide these pawns forward. The king moves aside. Also, this king needs to be activated and be part of the game. And here I play the move f6, preventing the knight from rerouting like this, for example. The king goes there, and I try to bring in my king. King to f5, trying to support the pawn push sooner or later, as these pawns will be cooked at some point. Either the bishop moves there or the knight, and I need to get these pawns rolling. Otherwise, I'm going to lose for sure. The knight drops back, wants to go here. King to g4 would have been a good move. Instead, I wanted to create a passer, and I succeed in creating a passer. But the downside is now that the knight attacks 2 pawns at the same time. But I thought, and we were already in time pressure here, I was thinking, okay, as long as I have a pass pawn, I will be able to pose him with some trouble. And I push the pawn forward. Giving up this pawn, takes back and takes, but now I can push the pawn even further. And white needs to be very accurate, because I'm already quite advanced up the board, and the pieces are not coordinated perfectly at the moment. But this pawn sacrifice was not correct, because my opponent simply should have taken. Well, we were already, like I said, in time trouble, but with some calculations, yeah, white was actually winning here because of this sequence of moves, as in the end, you know, I will promote, but in this position, white is simply faster and white is winning. Instead, my opponent went to e3 with the king, and now I have some time to get in behind the pawn and support it going forward. And here, my opponent cannot really take, because then I simply promote and the bishop is not back in time, right? Here I will simply promote. And this doesn't work because the king can hide here. And yeah, you cannot really stop this pawn from promoting now. So instead, my opponent decides to move the bishop here to attack the pawn. And if I move my pawn forward, then the king can come in as a defender. But still, this would be winning for me, as I can move this pawn now, right? So here, you can't take this pawn, because then I will go here, right? So here, and then I will promote this pawn, which is winning. But instead, if you go here, because you need to keep an eye on this pawn as well, then I go forward. And now if you hide your king here, then I have a super nice tempo here. And in this position, I will go after promoting this pawn. This king needs to stay here. Otherwise, I will go here and simply promote. No way to stop this. So if you make a random move, then I will go here and then next start promoting this pawn. But I saw a super nice and brilliant move, and that is to give a check. And if you take back with the king, well, then I go here and you don't have access to this diagonal, and I will simply promote my pawn. But better would have been to take with the bishop. And this is not a good move now, because then you can come here, pinning the pawn. And this is actually better for white, because after a move like this, then white can actually take this pawn, and this is better for white. Instead, I move my pawn forward, and here king f2 doesn't really work, because I go forward. And again, if you have the check here, well, then I will promote. And there's no really other move you can make. Well, you can go here, but this is winning for me with the extra pawn here. Instead, my opponent went to f3 with the king, and then I simply move up the king, and my opponent resigns, because there's nothing you can do to stop me from promoting. Maybe you're like, okay, let's go for the other pawns, but you'll not be in time, as I will promote very soon here. And this is a winning position for me. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and see you soon. Bye bye.